2,000 years ago. The Romans built massive aqueducts that carried water across mountains, through tunnels, and somehow made it flow uphill. While the ancient world saw magic, Roman engineers understood pressure, gravity, and the hidden power of water. But behind these incredible structures were deadly accidents, dark secrets, and underground systems buried beneath Rome. This is the story of how the Romans mastered water and built one of the greatest engineering wonders in human history. The impossible water. The sun had barely risen over the hills of ancient Rome. Golden light stretched across dusty roads, marble temples, and crowded markets waiting for another busy day. Bakers pushed carts filled with fresh bread. Soldiers marched through narrow streets. Merchants shouted prices for olives, fish, and wine. And beneath it all, water moved. Not just in rivers. Not just in wells. But across mountains. Across valleys. Through stone tunnels. And somehow, uphill. For most people in the ancient world, that sounded impossible. Water always flowed down. Everyone knew that. If you poured water from a cup, it fell. If rain landed on a hill, it rolled downward. So how could the Romans send water to cities that sat higher than the rivers feeding them? The answer became one of the greatest engineering mysteries of the ancient world. And it began with a young worker named Lucius. Lucius was 16 years old when he first saw the aqueduct. He had heard stories about it since childhood. People said it stretched farther than the eye could see. Some claimed the gods themselves had built it. Others whispered that Roman engineers used magic. But when Lucius finally reached the construction site outside the city, he stopped walking completely. The structure towered above him. Huge stone arches marched across the valley like giants frozen in time. Row after row. Arch after arch. Perfectly balanced. Workers climbed wooden scaffolding high above the ground while carts dragged massive stones through clouds of dust. At the very top of the arches was a narrow covered channel. That tiny channel carried water for miles. Fresh mountain water. Cold and clear. Lucius stared upward. "How does it reach the city?" he asked. An older engineer nearby smiled. "Gravity." Lucius frowned. "But Rome is higher than some of the land behind us." The engineer's smile widened. "Exactly." The man's name was Marcus Vitruvius Severus. Most workers simply called him Severus. He was one of Rome's master hydraulic engineers. His hair had turned gray years ago, and his hands were rough from decades of work, but his eyes remained sharp. Severus handed Lucius a clay cup filled with water. "Pour it." Lucius emptied the cup onto the dirt. The water rolled downhill instantly. "What did you learn?" Severus asked. "That water flows down." "Correct." "And what if the land rises again farther ahead?" "Then the water stops." Severus nodded slowly. "That is what most men believe." He pointed toward the distant aqueduct. But the Romans learned something else. For weeks, Lucius carried stone blocks, mixed mortar, and clean tools. But every evening, he watched the engineers. They measured slopes using strange wooden instruments. They checked levels endlessly. Sometimes they argued over differences smaller than a finger width. Lucius could not understand why such tiny measurements mattered so much. One evening, he finally asked. Severus drew a line in the dirt. "This," he said, "is an aqueduct channel." Then he tilted the line slightly. "If the slope is too steep, the water rushes too fast and damages the stone." He flattened the line. "If it is too flat, the water stops moving." Lucius leaned closer. "So it must be perfect?" "Almost perfect," Severus replied. He drew another line barely tilted downward. Most Roman aqueducts fall only a few feet every mile. Lucius blinked. "That little?" Severus nodded proudly. "We do not force the water. We guide it." But the true mystery appeared days later. Severus led Lucius far beyond the arches into a rocky valley. There, buried beneath the earth, workers were connecting thick lead pipes. Lucius looked confused. "There are no arches here." "We do not always use arches," Severus explained. He pointed toward one side of the valley. "The water enters there." Then he pointed to the opposite hill. "And exits up there." Lucius stared. "But that hill is higher." Severus grinned. "Now you are asking the correct question." The engineer picked up a wineskin filled with water. He squeezed it gently. Water shot from the nozzle. "What moved the water?" he asked. "The pressure." "Exactly." Severus placed the wineskin lower than Lucius's head and squeezed again. The water still sprayed upward. The Romans discovered something powerful. Water under pressure can rise higher than where it currently flows. Lucius looked back at the pipes crossing the valley. "They send water downward first?" "Yes." "And the pressure pushes it upward again?" "Yes." Lucius's eyes widened. The Romans were not making water break nature's laws. They were using nature's laws in a smarter way. This system was called an inverted siphon. And it terrified many workers. If the pressure became too strong, pipes exploded. Lead joints burst apart. Stone supports cracked. Entire sections collapsed with roaring floods that could kill nearby laborers instantly. One old worker showed Lucius scars across his arm. "Pressure," the man muttered darkly. "Invisible danger." At night, workers told stories about aqueduct failures. Some believed angry river spirits attacked the pipes. Others blamed curses. But Severus blamed mathematics. "Most disasters," he said, "begin with bad calculations." One afternoon, a messenger arrived from Rome carrying urgent news. A growing district near the Aventine Hill had lost water access. Public fountains had slowed to a trickle. Bathhouses were closing. Citizens were furious. The Senate demanded a solution immediately. Severus gathered his engineers around a large wax tablet map. Lucius watched silently from the edge. "The old channel no longer provides enough pressure," one engineer warned. "We could build another arch line," another suggested. "Too expensive," someone replied. Severus remained quiet. Then he pointed toward a deep valley outside the city. "We use an inverted siphon." Several engineers exchanged nervous looks. "That valley is dangerous. The pressure would be enormous. Lead pipes may fail." Severus looked at Lucius. "What happens if Rome loses water?" Lucius hesitated. "People panic." "Correct. In ancient Rome, water was power. Without water, fountains dried. Bathhouses closed. Sewers stopped functioning. Disease spread quickly. A city of 1 million people depended on engineering staying alive every single day. Construction began immediately. Thousands of workers arrived. Trees were cut for scaffolding. Stone channels were expanded. Massive lead pipes were forged in smoky workshops. The heat was unbearable. Workers hammered molten metal into curved sheets, then sealed them into pipes. Every connection had to survive crushing pressure. Lucius worked beside pipe makers until his hands blistered raw. One night, exhausted workers sat around a fire eating bread and olives. An older laborer shook his head. "I still do not trust uphill water." Another laughed nervously. "Maybe Neptune pushes it himself." Lucius stayed quiet. But secretly, he wondered too. Weeks later, the system was ready. Crowds gathered across the valley. Roman officials arrived wearing white togas with purple borders. Even senators came to watch. If the siphon failed, Severus's career would be destroyed. Possibly worse. In Rome, failure in public works could ruin entire families. Severus stood beside the main valve. The enormous lead pipe disappeared downhill into the valley before climbing the opposite side. Everyone waited silently. Lucius could hear wind moving through the grass. Severus raised his hand. "Open it." Workers turned the heavy mechanism. At first, nothing happened. Then a deep rumble echoed underground. Water rushed into the pipes. The sound grew louder. The pressure increased. Several workers stepped backward nervously. The pipe trembled slightly. A few senators looked uneasy. Then, boom! A deafening crack exploded across the valley. Women screamed. Workers ducked. One pipe joint burst open halfway down the slope, launching a violent spray of water high into the air. The pressure wave shook nearby supports. Mud and water blasted everywhere. Lucius fell to the ground. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the entire system would collapse. Severus did not panic. "Close section 3, he shouted instantly. Engineers sprinted toward emergency valves. Workers fought to stop the flooding. The damaged pipe hissed violently like an angry beast. Finally, the water slowed. Then stopped. Silence covered the valley. Roman officials looked furious. One senator stepped forward. "You promised this would work." Severus wiped mud from his face calmly. "It will." The senator pointed toward the destroyed pipe. "That looks like failure." Severus shook his head. "No. That is knowledge." That night, Lucius found Severus studying calculations by oil lamp. "You are not afraid?" Lucius asked. Severus smiled faintly. "Always." "Then why continue?" The old engineer looked toward the dark valley. "Because Rome survives on men willing to solve impossible problems." He adjusted a wax tablet covered in measurements. "The pressure exceeded our estimate at the lowest point. Can it be fixed?" "Yes." "How?" Severus looked directly at him. "We make the pipes stronger." For the next month, workers rebuilt the damaged section using thicker lead and additional stone supports. This time, Severus changed the pipe angles carefully. Every measurement was checked again and again. Lucius finally understood something important. Roman engineering was not magic. It was patience, observation, failure, correction, and relentless testing. The Romans made water flow uphill because they studied nature more carefully than anyone before them. The second test came at dawn. Fewer officials attended this time. Most expected another disaster. Severus stood beside Lucius quietly. "Watch the hill," he said. The valves opened. Water thundered into the siphon again. The pipes groaned under pressure. But this time, nothing burst. The rumbling continued smoothly beneath the valley floor. Seconds passed. Then suddenly, a fountain of crystal-clear water erupted from the outlet high on the opposite hill. The crowd gasped. The water climbed upward through the pipes before pouring into the city channel beyond. Lucius stared in disbelief. The Romans had done it. Water appeared to rise against gravity itself. Severus folded his arms proudly. "Nature always follows rules," he said softly. "The trick is learning which rules matter." And far away inside the growing city of Rome, fountains began flowing again. Bathhouses reopened. Citizens filled buckets with fresh mountain water. Most people never thought about the hidden pressure systems beneath their feet. They simply enjoyed the miracle. But Lucius knew the truth. The miracle was not magic. It was engineering. And Rome was becoming the greatest machine the ancient world had ever seen. The secret inside Roman pipes. Night covered Rome like a dark blanket. But beneath the sleeping city, water still moved. Quietly. Endlessly. Through hidden tunnels under streets, beneath temples, below crowded houses and noisy markets, thousands of gallons of water flowed every hour through Roman channels and pipes. Most citizens never saw it. They only saw the fountains, the baths, the clean drinking water. But deep underground, Rome was alive with invisible rivers. And Lucius was about to enter them for the first time. A week after the successful siphon test, Severus arrived before sunrise. "Bring a torch," he said. "Where are we going?" Lucius asked. "The veins of Rome." They walked through narrow streets while the city slowly woke around them. Bread ovens glowed orange in bakeries. Donkeys dragged carts over stone roads. Soldiers changed guard outside government buildings. Eventually they reached a small stone structure beside a public fountain. To most people, it looked unimportant. Severus unlocked a heavy iron gate. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. Lucius hesitated. "What is this place?" Severus smiled faintly. "The part of Rome nobody sees." They descended a narrow staircase deep underground. The sounds of the city faded behind them. Soon only dripping water remained. Torchlight flickered across wet stone walls. Then Lucius heard it. A deep rushing sound. Like an underground river. They turned a corner. And Lucius stopped completely. Water thundered through a massive stone channel carved beneath the city. The tunnel stretched endlessly into darkness. The current moved fast but smoothly, carrying fresh mountain water toward the heart of Rome. Lucius stared in awe. "It's enormous." Severus nodded proudly. "One aqueduct alone can carry millions of liters every day." Lucius touched the stone wall carefully. It felt cold and damp. "How old is this tunnel?" "Older than your grandfather." "And it still works?" Severus laughed softly. "That is the Roman way." The old engineer lifted the torch toward the ceiling. "You see the shape?" Lucius noticed the curved roof immediately. "It's rounded." "Exactly. Rounded ceilings distribute pressure better than flat ones." Severus pointed lower. "And notice the floor." The channel floor sloped gently downward. Barely noticeable. But enough to keep water moving. "The Romans built for centuries," Severus explained. "Not years." Farther inside the tunnel, workers repaired a cracked section of stone. Lucius watched carefully. Instead of using ordinary mortar, they mixed strange gray volcanic ash into the cement. "What is that?" he asked. "Pozzolana," Severus replied. "Volcanic ash from near the Bay of Naples." Lucius frowned. "Why use ash?" "Because water cannot destroy it easily." He tapped the hardened material proudly. "Roman concrete becomes stronger over time." Lucius blinked. "Stronger?" "Yes." Many centuries later, people would still wonder how Roman structures survived so long. Their secret was hidden inside that strange volcanic mixture. As they continued walking, the tunnel narrowed. Now lead pipes appeared beside the main channel. Some were thin. Others were wide enough for a man to crawl through. Lucius ran his fingers along one pipe. The surface felt smooth and cold. "So this is how water travels uphill?" "Partly," Severus said. He knelt beside a pipe joint. "Pressure changes everything." The engineer drew a quick diagram in the dirt. "When water flows downhill inside a closed pipe, pressure builds." He pointed lower on the drawing. "The deeper the drop, the greater the pressure." Then he pointed upward. "That pressure can force water upward again." Lucius nodded slowly. "The valley pushes the water back up." "Exactly." The old engineer smiled. "You are learning." But suddenly Severus became serious. "Pressure also kills." He guided Lucius farther ahead toward a damaged chamber. The walls there were blackened. Broken pipe fragments littered the floor. What happened here? Lucius whispered. A rupture.
Severus's voice grew quiet.
3 workers died.
Lucius stared at the shattered lead pipe.
The metal had split open violently. The pressure became too high? Yes.
Severus touched the cracked pipe carefully.
1 bad joint. 1 weak seal. That is all it takes. Roman pipemakers worked constantly. Entire workshops across Rome produced lead piping day and night. Workers melted lead over blazing furnaces.
The air became thick with toxic smoke. Many laborers grew sick after years inside the workshops.
Some lost memory.
Others developed shaking hands.
But ancient Romans did not fully understand lead poisoning.
They only knew pipe workers often died younger than soldiers.
Later that evening, Lucius visited one of the great pipe foundries outside the city. The heat struck him immediately. Molten lead glowed bright orange inside giant vats. Workers hammered sheets of metal into curved forms.
Others sealed seams carefully with hot solder. The noise was deafening.
Clang! 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 Foreman Decimus shouted over the chaos. Every pipe must survive pressure.
He grabbed a half-finished section. If one fails, an entire district loses water.
Lucius watched sweating workers shape pipe after pipe without stopping.
Rome's water system depended on thousands of invisible pieces working perfectly together. Near midnight, Severus revealed something even stranger. He led Lucius through a hidden maintenance passage beneath the city center. Eventually they reached a giant underground chamber.
Huge stone tanks filled the room. Water poured into them continuously from multiple aqueduct lines. What is this place? Lucius asked. A distribution reservoir. The chamber controlled water pressure across the city. Some channels fed fountains. Others fed bathhouses. Others supplied wealthy homes.
Severus pointed toward rows of outlet pipes.
The higher the outlet, the weaker the pressure. Lucius looked carefully. So the lower pipes receive stronger flow? Yes.
The Romans had mastered hydraulic balance centuries before modern plumbing existed.
Suddenly footsteps echoed nearby.
Several guards entered the chamber escorting a frightened man in chains.
Lucius stepped aside nervously. What happened? He whispered.
Severus frowned darkly.
Water theft. The prisoner looked exhausted.
One guard spat at the ground. He cut illegal connections into the pipes.
Lucius blinked. People steal water? Constantly, Severus replied. Fresh water in Rome was incredibly valuable.
Some wealthy citizens secretly diverted public water supplies to private gardens and fountains. Others bribed corrupt officials for illegal pipe access. Water crime had become so common that Rome created special inspectors to hunt offenders.
The chained man suddenly shouted. My children needed water.
One guard struck him hard.
Severus looked away. The city survives on order, he muttered quietly. Lucius noticed something unsettling in the engineer's voice.
Even miracles came with cruelty. Days later, disaster nearly struck again. Lucius and Severus inspected pipes near a crowded bathhouse district when they heard screaming above ground.
People ran through the streets.
Water burst upward from beneath stone pavement.
A main pipe had exploded. The pressure blast shattered sections of road and flooded nearby shops instantly. Workers rushed to shut emergency valves.
But the flooding spread fast. Market stalls collapsed.
Citizens climbed onto rooftops to escape the water. Lucius watched in horror as muddy torrents rushed through the streets. What caused it? He shouted.
Severus examined the broken pipe carefully. Then his expression hardened. This was no accident.
Someone had damaged the support structure intentionally. Sabotage.
A rival political faction wanted to embarrass city officials by disrupting Rome's water supply.
In ancient Rome, water systems were political weapons. Control the water. Control the city. The Senate panicked immediately. Repair crews worked day and night while rumors spread across Rome. Some citizens feared enemy spies.
Others blamed angry gods. Meanwhile, Severus focused only on the evidence. Fear destroys cities faster than floods, he told Lucius. For 3 days they repaired the damaged network. Lucius barely slept. Every hour without water increased chaos. Public baths closed again. Fountains stopped flowing. Crowds formed around working wells. Fights broke out. The deeper Lucius entered Rome's hidden infrastructure, the more he realized something terrifying. The city's greatness rested on fragile systems few people understood. If the water stopped long enough, Rome itself could begin collapsing. On the 4th night, Severus finally brought Lucius to the highest aqueduct overlook outside the city. Moonlight illuminated the great arches stretching across the land. Miles and miles of stone carrying life toward Rome. They will stand for centuries, Lucius said quietly. Severus remained silent for a moment. Then he answered softly. Only if future generations maintain them. Wind moved through the arches like distant whispers. The greatest danger is not enemies, Severus continued. Or floods. Or earthquakes. What is it? The old engineer looked toward the glowing city below. People forgetting how things work. Lucius stared at the aqueducts differently now. Before, they had seemed like monuments. Now he understood they were machines. Living systems requiring constant care. Thousands of workers. Thousands of calculations. Thousands of repairs. The water flowing uphill was not a single miracle. It was a chain of knowledge passed from one engineer to another. And if that knowledge disappeared, even Rome could become thirsty. Far below them, hidden pipes continued carrying water beneath the sleeping empire. Through pressure. Through gravity. Through mathematics. And through the determination of people who refused to accept impossible limits. Lucius finally understood why Roman engineers were respected almost like generals. Armies conquered lands. But engineers made civilization possible. The giant aqueducts that shocked the ancient world. The empire of Rome was growing faster than ever. More houses. More markets. More bathhouses. More fountains. And more people. Every year, thousands arrived from distant lands hoping to build new lives inside the greatest city on earth. But there was one terrifying problem. Rome was running out of water again. At sunrise, crowds gathered around public fountains carrying clay jars and wooden buckets. Some waited for hours. Arguments broke out constantly. In poorer districts, water pressure had become weak. The upper floors of apartment buildings sometimes received nothing at all. Meanwhile, wealthy neighborhoods still enjoyed private baths, decorative fountains, and gardens filled with flowing water. Anger spread through the city. And inside the Senate, fear spread even faster. Lucius stood beside Severus during an emergency meeting near the construction office. Several officials argued loudly over maps. We need another aqueduct. The treasury cannot afford it. The people are furious. Severus remained calm. How much additional water does the city require? He asked. One official answered immediately. At least 20 million more liters every day. Lucius nearly choked. That amount sounded impossible. But Severus simply nodded. Then we build. The new aqueduct would become one of the largest engineering projects Rome had ever attempted. Its source lay far beyond the hills, where cold mountain springs flowed through untouched forests. The water was pure. Fresh. Perfect for the growing capital. But there was a problem. Actually, many problems. The route crossed valleys, cliffs, unstable ground, and solid rock mountains.
Some sections would require tunnels.
Others needed gigantic bridge-like arches taller than many buildings in Rome itself. Workers whispered the same thing everywhere.
It cannot be done.
But Romans loved impossible projects. Within weeks, survey teams spread across the countryside.
Lucius joined them for the first time.
The engineers carried measuring rods, ropes, leveling tools, and strange water-filled instruments used to calculate slopes.
Every inch mattered. Too steep?
The water would destroy the channels.
Too flat?
The flow would stop completely. Severus explained carefully while checking measurements.
Most people think greatness comes from giant stones.
He pointed toward a tiny leveling mark. But empires survive because of tiny details. One afternoon the team reached a massive valley.
Lucius stared in disbelief.
The gap stretched nearly half a mile wide.
How can water cross this?
Severus pointed toward the sky.
With arches. Months later, construction began. The sound of labor echoed across the valley endlessly. Thousands of workers filled the site. Stone cutters, brick makers, surveyors, slave laborers, carpenters, metal workers, animal handlers. Roman soldiers guarded supply lines while giant cranes lifted heavy blocks into place. From a distance, the unfinished arches looked like enormous skeletons rising from the earth. Lucius had never seen so many people working together before. Entire teams specialized in single tasks. Some only shaped stone. Others mixed mortar.
Some workers climbed terrifying heights carrying materials across narrow wooden beams.
One slip meant death. And slips happened often.
A young laborer named Titus became Lucius's friend during the project.
Titus was strong, loud, and always joking.
Even during exhausting work, he somehow kept smiling. One day, Titus laughed while carrying tools. People will stare at this aqueduct and think giants built it.
Lucius smiled. Or madmen. Same thing.
The higher the arches climbed, the more dangerous the work became.
Strong winds shook scaffolding high above the valley floor. Workers tied ropes around their waists for safety. Still, accidents happened constantly.
One afternoon, a support beam snapped without warning.
Lucius heard the crack echo across the site. Then screams.
Several workers fell with collapsing scaffolding from nearly 100 feet above ground.
The impact killed them instantly. Everything stopped. Hammering. Shouting. Movement.
Only silence remained.
Roman construction rarely paused for long. The dead were removed. The scaffolding rebuilt. And work continued. Lucius struggled to understand how people could return so quickly after witnessing death. That evening he asked Severus, "How do workers continue after something like that?"
The old engineer stared toward the unfinished arches. Because Rome does not stop. His answer felt cold. But Lucius slowly realized something painful.
Ancient wonders were often built with human suffering hidden beneath them.
As the aqueduct expanded farther into the mountains, tunnel crews began carving through solid rock. This became the hardest part of the project. Workers spent entire days underground using iron tools and fire heating techniques to crack stone walls.
The tunnels were narrow, hot, airless. Sometimes workers disappeared inside for days. And sometimes, they never returned. One morning a tunnel section collapsed. Dust exploded outward from the mountain entrance. Panic spread immediately.
Workers rushed toward the site screaming names into the darkness.
Lucius joined rescue crews carrying torches.
Inside the tunnel, the air felt thick and suffocating. Broken beams blocked the passage.
Somewhere deeper inside, men were trapped.
The rescuers dug desperately through fallen rock.
Hours passed. Sweat mixed with dust until everyone looked gray like statues.
Finally, faint voices answered from beyond the collapse.
Alive.
The trapped workers survived in a small air pocket. But reaching them safely would take time.
Severus organized support reinforcements instantly.
No reckless digging, he warned.
One mistake could bury them forever.
For 2 days the rescue continued. Citizens from nearby villages brought food and water for exhausted crews. At night, torches covered the mountain like stars.
Finally, rescuers broke through. 3 workers emerged alive.
The crowd erupted with cheers. But 4 others remained buried behind collapsed stone too dangerous to remove.
The tunnel became their tomb. Roman engineers sealed part of the passage permanently. Then construction continued around it. Weeks later, the aqueduct arches finally reached full height across the valley. Lucius climbed one of the upper platforms with Severus.
The view stole his breath. The arches stretched across the land endlessly like a road in the sky.
Tiny workers moved below like ants. How high are we? Lucius asked quietly. Higher than most buildings in Rome.
Strong wind rushed past them.
Lucius looked down carefully and instantly regretted it. The ground seemed impossibly far away. At the top sat the water channel itself. Simple. Narrow.
Almost disappointing after such massive construction.
Lucius frowned. All this, for a small channel? Severus smiled.
The smallest things often carry the greatest power.
When the first water entered the unfinished aqueduct system, workers celebrated wildly. Fresh mountain water traveled mile after mile toward Rome. But not everyone welcomed the project. Enemies of Rome understood something important. Destroy the water, and you weaken the empire. Rumors spread that foreign agents planned sabotage attacks. Some feared poison. Others feared structural damage. Roman guards increased patrols around critical aqueduct sections.
At night, soldiers watched the channels carrying torches and spears.
Lucius once asked a guard captain if enemies truly targeted aqueducts.
The captain nodded grimly.
An army can survive weeks without battle.
He pointed toward the flowing water.
But not long without this. One evening, panic erupted at a temporary reservoir camp.
Several workers became violently sick after drinking from storage barrels. People shouted about poison immediately.
Fear spread fast. Some workers refused to continue.
Others demanded military protection. Severus personally investigated the situation.
After hours of inspection, he discovered the truth. Spoiled food. Not poisoned water. Still, the fear remained. Because everyone understood how vulnerable Rome truly was. Then came the crack.
The disaster nobody expected. It happened during final pressure testing near the valley arches. Lucius stood beside Severus when a strange sound echoed through the structure.
A deep grinding noise. Like stone rubbing against stone.
Workers froze. Another sound followed.
Crack.
A thin fracture raced across one of the massive support sections.
Dust poured downward instantly. Evacuate the upper platforms. Severus roared. Panic exploded. Workers sprinted across scaffolding while supervisors screamed orders. The crack widened visibly. Stone fragments rained into the valley below. Lucius felt the entire arch trembling beneath his feet. For one horrifying moment, it seemed the giant structure might collapse completely.
Thousands of tons of stone balanced above them.
If the arch failed, sections of the aqueduct could fall like dominoes. Entire months of work destroyed instantly. And hundreds might die. Severus grabbed Lucius's arm. Move.
They ran across the upper walkway as workers fled in every direction.
Below them, engineers scrambled to reinforce the weakened section with emergency timber supports.
The cracking sound grew louder.
Then suddenly, silence.
the arch stopped moving. Dust drifted slowly through the air.
Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed.
Hours later, Severus inspected the damaged support carefully. The foundation shifted, he said grimly.
Unstable soil. Lucius looked pale. Can it be saved? Severus stared at the giant fracture. Yes. How?
The old engineer looked toward hundreds of exhausted workers waiting nearby.
We rebuild the foundation. Lucius blinked in disbelief. That could take months. Severus nodded.
Then we work for months.
And so they did.
Roman engineers dug beneath the damaged arch completely. They reinforced the ground with deeper stone supports and stronger foundations.
Piece by piece. Day after day. The project slowed. Costs exploded. Senators complained constantly.
But Severus refused shortcuts.
Water systems cannot lie, he warned officials. A hidden weakness always reveals itself eventually. Finally, nearly a year after construction began, the Great Aqueduct was complete. Crowds gathered for miles to witness the opening. Even from a distance, the arches looked impossible. A river suspended in the sky. Lucius stood beside Severus as water entered the channel. The current moved smoothly across the massive structure. Through tunnels. Across bridges. Down hidden pipes. Toward the heart of Rome. And this time, nothing cracked. Nothing burst. Nothing failed. Far away, fountains across Rome erupted with fresh water stronger than ever before. Bathhouses reopened fully. Public fountains overflowed. Citizens cheered in the streets. Most people celebrated the water. But Lucius stared at the aqueduct itself. At the arches. The tunnels. The hidden mathematics holding everything together. And for the first time, he realized something extraordinary. The Roman Empire was not held together by armies alone. It was held together by engineers. The dark side of Roman water. The fountains of Rome never slept. Day and night, cold mountain water poured endlessly into marble basins across the city. Children played beside them. Merchants filled buckets. Travelers washed dust from their faces. To the people of Rome, flowing water meant civilization itself. It meant power, cleanliness, luxury, and greatness. But beneath the shining fountains and magnificent bathhouses, something dark was spreading quietly through the empire. And almost nobody understood it. Lucius first noticed the problem during summer. Workers inside the pipe foundries were becoming sick more often. At first it seemed ordinary. Headaches, weakness, exhaustion. But soon the symptoms worsened. Some workers forgot simple instructions. Others developed shaking hands. A few collapsed during work entirely. One pipemaker suddenly screamed at invisible figures before falling unconscious beside a furnace. The older workers whispered the same word afterward. Lead. Roman pipes were everywhere. Miles and miles of them. Under streets. Inside walls. Beneath bathhouses. And through wealthy homes. The metal was perfect for plumbing. Soft. Flexible. Easy to shape. But nobody fully understood the danger hidden inside it. One evening Lucius visited the pipe workshop again. The air inside felt heavy and poisonous. Gray smoke drifted across the ceiling while molten lead bubbled inside giant furnaces. Workers coughed constantly. Some had pale skin and strange empty expressions. Foreman Decimus looked worse than before. His hands trembled while lifting tools. You should rest, Lucius said carefully. Decimus laughed weakly. Rest, he muttered. Rome never rests. Then he suddenly forgot what he was about to say next. For several awkward seconds he simply stared at the furnace silently. Lucius felt uneasy. Something was very wrong. Later that night, Lucius spoke with Severus privately. "Do you think the pipes are making workers sick?"
The old engineer remained quiet for a long moment. Then he answered carefully.
"Some Greek physicians suspect it." "Then why continue using lead?" Severus sighed deeply. "Because Rome depends on it." That was the terrifying truth.
The entire Roman water system relied heavily on lead pipes.
Replacing them would cost enormous amounts of money and labor.
And many officials refused to believe the metal caused harm at all. Some argued the flowing water prevented danger.
Others claimed only weak workers became sick. Most simply ignored the warnings.
Because the empire needed water more than answers. But the dark side of Rome's water system extended far beyond sickness.
It also created corruption. Massive corruption. One afternoon Severus brought Lucius to inspect water pressure problems in a wealthy district. Public fountains nearby had slowed almost completely. Citizens complained constantly.
Yet the mansions on the hills still overflowed with water. Gardens sparkled with decorative pools.
Private fountains sprayed endlessly. Something did not make sense. Inside an underground inspection tunnel, Severus discovered the truth quickly. Illegal pipe connections. Dozens of them. Secret lead lines branched away from the public supply into private estates. Lucius stared in disbelief. They stole water from the city? Severus nodded grimly. Wealthy families bribe inspectors constantly.
The illegal pipes were expertly hidden behind stone walls. Someone with engineering knowledge had installed them carefully.
This was not random theft. It was organized corruption.
As they followed the hidden network deeper underground, Lucius realized how enormous the operation truly was.
Entire neighborhoods secretly diverted public water.
Some estates consumed more water than entire apartment districts filled with poor families.
And everyone involved made money. Officials accepted bribes. Workers stayed silent.
Inspectors altered records. The water system that symbolized Roman greatness had also become a machine for greed.
Suddenly voices echoed nearby. Severus extinguished the torch instantly. The tunnel fell dark. Footsteps approached. Lucius heard men talking quietly. "The senator wants increased flow before the festival. We already diverted too much. He pays well." Torchlight appeared around the corner. Severus whispered softly, "Stay silent."
Two maintenance workers passed carrying tools and sealed documents.
Illegal workers. After they disappeared, Lucius looked shocked. "They know they're stealing."
"Yes," Severus replied coldly.
"But powerful men rarely fear punishment."
The next morning Severus reported the illegal network to city officials.
Nothing happened. No arrests. No investigations. No repairs.
Instead, several senators suddenly criticized Severus publicly for mismanagement of water supplies.
Lucius finally understood.
The corruption reached the highest levels of Rome itself.
Meanwhile, another danger was spreading through the crowded city. Disease. Rome's bathhouses were legendary across the ancient world. Huge heated pools. Steam rooms. Cold baths. Exercise halls. Libraries. Rich and poor alike gathered there daily. To Romans, bathing was civilization. But packed crowds and shared water created invisible risks. Especially during hot summers. One week, strange fevers began spreading through crowded districts. People developed violent stomach sickness and weakness. Soon entire households became ill. Doctors blamed bad air. Some priests blamed angry gods. Others suspected poisoned water again. Panic returned quickly. Lucius accompanied Severus through several infected neighborhoods. The smell alone was terrible. Crowded apartment buildings overflowed with waste. Sewers struggled to keep up. Fresh water entered the city constantly. But so did filth. Children cried inside dark rooms. Street vendors abandoned markets. Even fountains became quiet. Fear spread faster than disease itself. Can the aqueducts stop this? Lucius asked. Severus looked exhausted. Aqueducts bring clean water in. He pointed toward overflowing drains nearby. But cities must also remove dirty water out. That became Rome's endless battle. As the empire grew larger, its infrastructure struggled to keep pace. The same engineering brilliance that made Rome powerful also created dangerous overcrowding. One evening Lucius met an old physician named Cassian near a bathhouse district. The doctor looked troubled. Too many people, Cassian muttered. Too much filth. He lowered his voice carefully. And perhaps too much lead. Lucius frowned. You believe the pipes harm people? Cassian nodded slowly. I have treated wealthy men with failing minds. Wealthy? They drink from private pipes daily. The doctor looked toward a flowing fountain. Perhaps Rome's greatest invention is poisoning it slowly. The idea haunted Lucius afterward. Could the empire's greatest achievement also become one of its greatest dangers? Historians centuries later would debate that very question. Some believe lead poisoning weakened Roman society over generations. Others argued the danger was exaggerated. But nobody could deny one thing. Rome's water system came with hidden costs. Then came the underground deaths. A repair crew vanished while inspecting older tunnels beneath the city. At first officials assumed tunnel collapse. But when rescue teams entered the passages, they discovered something worse. Poisonous gases. Deep underground chambers sometimes trapped deadly air from sewage and stagnant water. Workers entered carrying torches. And never came back out. Lucius joined the recovery team reluctantly. The tunnels felt suffocating. Some areas smelled rotten and metallic at the same time. They found the workers collapsed beside their tools. No injuries. No cave-in. Just silence. Afterward, Severus ordered better ventilation shafts added across several tunnel sections. But privately he admitted something disturbing. We build faster than we fully understand. Despite everything, the people of Rome still admired the aqueducts. Visitors from distant kingdoms stared at the fountains in amazement. Foreign ambassadors described Rome as a city where water obeyed human command. And in many ways, it was true. No civilization on earth had mastered water like the Romans. But beneath the marble beauty existed cracks nobody wanted to discuss. Lead. Corruption. Disease. Overcrowding. Hidden failures underground. Late one night, Lucius climbed the great aqueduct overlook alone. Moonlight illuminated the endless arches stretching across the land. The structures still looked immortal. Perfect. Powerful. Yet now he understood something deeper. Civilizations do not collapse suddenly. They weaken slowly. Quietly. Like tiny cracks spreading through stone. Invisible at first. Then impossible to stop. Behind him, the waters of Rome continued flowing through tunnels, pipes, and hidden chambers beneath the sleeping empire. Still moving uphill. Still defying expectations. Still feeding the greatest city in the ancient world. But somewhere deep below, the darkness was flowing too. The fall of Rome's water empire. For centuries, the aqueducts of Rome carried life across the empire. Water crossed mountains. Flowed through tunnels. Rushed beneath valleys. And climbed uphill through pressure systems so advanced that many future civilizations would struggle to understand them. The Romans believed their engineering would last forever. But forever is a dangerous word. Lucius was no longer a young apprentice. Years had passed.
His hands had grown rough like Severus's. His hair carried streaks of gray. And now, for the first time in generations, Rome felt afraid. The empire was changing. Far from the capital, borders weakened under endless attacks. Germanic tribes pushed against Roman territory from the north. Civil wars drained money and soldiers. Corruption spread deeper into government. Roads deteriorated. Trade slowed. And maintaining the massive water system became harder every year. At first, ordinary citizens barely noticed. Fountains still flowed. Bathhouses remained crowded. Aqueducts still stretched proudly across the countryside. But hidden problems were multiplying. Cracks went unrepaired. Tunnel inspections became less frequent. Experienced engineers died without properly training replacements. The knowledge chain that once made Rome powerful was beginning to break. One evening Lucius visited Severus, now old and weak, inside a small house overlooking the city. The old engineer studied maps beside dim candlelight. "You still work?" Lucius asked softly. Severus smiled faintly. "Rome still leaks." They shared tired laughter. Then Severus became serious. "Do you know the greatest danger facing Rome now?" Lucius expected the answer to be war. Or invasion. But Severus shook his head. Neglect. Outside the city, weeds already grew along sections of older aqueduct channels. Stone supports weathered under years of rain and wind. Some rural maintenance stations stood abandoned entirely. The empire that once repaired problems immediately now delayed everything. Money was short. Workers were fewer. And political leaders cared more about surviving power struggles than maintaining invisible infrastructure. Then came the raids. At first they were small attacks against villages and supply roads. But eventually enemy forces realized something important. Rome depended on water. Destroy the aqueducts. And you weaken the city without attacking its walls directly. One morning, smoke rose from the countryside west of Rome. Panic spread quickly. An aqueduct support station had been attacked during the night. Lucius rode there with emergency crews. The damage shocked him. Stone channels smashed apart. Maintenance buildings burned. Several workers killed. And worst of all, the water had stopped flowing. Citizens inside Rome noticed within hours. Public fountains weakened first. Then some bathhouses closed completely. Crowds gathered angrily around remaining water sources. Arguments turned into fights. Lucius watched soldiers struggle to control desperate civilians carrying empty buckets. The city suddenly felt fragile. Emergency repair teams worked non-stop. But repairing damaged aqueducts during wartime was dangerous. Enemy raiders attacked isolated crews repeatedly. Several engineers disappeared entirely. Others refused assignments outside city walls. For the first time in Roman history, fear interrupted the water supply itself. Late one night, Lucius stood beside Severus atop an aqueduct overlooking the dark countryside. Torches burned in the distance where villages had once stood peacefully. "They are learning," Severus said quietly. "The enemies?" "Yes." The old engineer touched the stone channel gently. "Armies defend Rome." He looked at the flowing water. "But this keeps Rome alive." Soon attacks grew larger. Entire aqueduct bridges became targets. Enemy forces shattered arches or blocked channels with debris. Sometimes only small sections needed destruction to disable miles of water flow. The giant system that once symbolized Roman strength had become difficult to protect fully. There were simply too many miles. Too many weak points. Too much empire. Inside the city, life slowly changed. The famous bathhouses began closing one by one. Without reliable water, the enormous heated pools became impossible to maintain. Some buildings stood silent and empty for the first time in centuries.
Citizens missed them deeply. Roman bathhouses were not merely places to wash.
They were social centers,
Libraries, meeting halls,
places where rich and poor mixed together.
Their closure felt like civilization itself fading. Lucius walked through one abandoned bath complex alone. Dust-covered marble floors. The pools stood empty and cracked. No steam filled the air anymore. No laughter echoed through the halls.
Only silence remained. He remembered visiting such places as a boy when Rome felt eternal. Now even the greatest structures seemed tired.
Food shortages followed next.
Aqueducts powered mills that ground grain into flour.
When water flow weakened, production slowed. Bread became expensive. Crowds grew angrier. Riots erupted in poorer districts.
The Senate blamed invaders.
The people blamed the Senate. And beneath it all,
the water continued failing. One desperate winter, Lucius organized repair teams personally across several damaged aqueduct sections. Snow covered the countryside while freezing winds tore through broken arches. Workers used torches to thaw frozen tools. Some repairs had to be completed hanging high above valleys in terrible weather.
More than once, exhausted laborers slipped from icy scaffolding.
The empire still fought to survive. But it no longer felt invincible. During one repair mission, Lucius discovered something heartbreaking. An abandoned maintenance station filled with old engineering records. Dust covered the shelves.
Rain leaked through the roof.
Important measurements and hydraulic calculations lay rotting unread.
Once, Roman engineers guarded such knowledge carefully. Now nobody even protected the documents.
Lucius gathered what he could carry. But he knew much had already been lost forever. Back in Rome, Severus had become too weak to travel.
Lucius visited often. One evening the old engineer asked quietly, "Do the aqueducts still hold?" "For now," Lucius answered. Severus nodded slowly. "That is all civilizations ever get." Not long afterward, Severus died peacefully during the night. The news spread quietly among engineers across Rome.
Many mourned him more deeply than some generals.
Because Severus represented something rare. Knowledge. Discipline. Patience. The kind of wisdom that builds empires slowly over generations.
Lucius stood beside the funeral pyre watching smoke rise into the sky. And for the first time, he feared Rome might truly fall. Years passed.
More aqueducts failed. Some from attacks. Others simply from age and neglect.
Entire sections of the city adapted to reduced water access.
Citizens returned to wells and local springs.
Some districts became dirty and overcrowded again. The shining image of Rome slowly faded.
Then came the unthinkable. Enemy armies entered Rome itself. Panic consumed the streets. Many aqueduct lines were cut deliberately during the invasions to weaken resistance. Without flowing water, fountains died across the city. The great baths closed permanently. Sewers stopped functioning properly. Disease spread quickly.
For many citizens, the silence of the fountains felt more terrifying than the soldiers. Because it meant Rome's heart had stopped beating. Lucius, now old himself, walked through the city during those dark days.
He passed dry fountains where children once played. Abandoned bathhouses. Broken pipes. Crumbling reservoirs.
The systems that once made Rome feel superhuman were collapsing piece by piece.
Not because the engineering failed, but because the civilization maintaining it failed. And yet,
something remarkable survived.
The aqueducts themselves.
Even damaged, many still stood proudly across valleys and hillsides.
The giant arches remained almost impossible to destroy completely.
Centuries later, travelers would still stare at them in amazement. Some continued carrying water long after the empire weakened. Others became bridges, roads, or ruins covered in grass and flowers.
But they endured. Why? Because Roman engineers built for the future.
They used deep foundations,
Careful mathematics, durable concrete, perfectly balanced arches. Even when Rome itself weakened, the structures resisted time stubbornly. As years turned into centuries, much ancient engineering knowledge disappeared. Future generations looked at the aqueducts almost like magic. How had the Romans measured such perfect slopes? How did they move so much water across impossible terrain? How did they make water appear to flow uphill? Many answers faded with the empire.
but the stone remained.
Silent. Waiting.
Near the end of his life, Lucius climbed one final aqueduct overlook at sunset. The arches stretched across the land glowing orange beneath the fading light. Some sections were broken.
Others still stood strong.
Wind moved softly through the channels where water once rushed endlessly.
Lucius closed his eyes. He could almost hear it again. The sound of Rome alive beneath his feet. The Romans had mastered water. Not with magic.
Not with miracles.
But with observation. Mathematics. Pressure. Persistence.
And generations of engineers willing to solve impossible problems.
Their empire eventually fell.
But their ideas survived.
And in many ways, the modern world still drinks from Roman knowledge today.